Thank you. Hello, Sylvia. Is she here?
I am here. Hey, honey, how are you?
Hi, babe.
Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday, darling. I'm going to clean up. You go ahead and take it away.
Listen, I was focusing in on that brew. I don't know that I'm gonna make it, but I would love for you to send me some.
I knew that was coming. Sister.
So hi everyone. I'd like you guys. I am paying attention to the chat, so please send some of your questions in the chat as we start to talk. But I just want to introduce myself for those who may not be familiar with me. My name is Sylvia Alston. I have spent about 23 years in risk management and finance. I have worked in the insurance industry for some of the largest corporations and brokerages in the risk management business. I stepped away from that career last year. As a matter of fact, it is 1 year this week that I stepped out of corporate America and decided to launch my own Black-owned insurance brokerage and firm. And so this week, when LaJoyce asked me to participate in her Wellness Warrior Weekend, it couldn't come really at a better or more celebratory time for me, because we are in the midst of our Festivus for the 1 year celebration of Momentum Risk Management. So I am really, really, really glad to be here with you all today. One of the things that I think I wanted to start talking about when LaJoyce asked me what my theme would look like, to try to keep in connection to the spirit of the work that LaJoyce does. And she does a tremendous and fabulous job in the wellness space. And she's always, I wouldn't say preaching, but teaching us about the importance of making sure that we are dedicating ourselves to our emotional, our physical, our spiritual, our mental, as well as our physical health. And one of the things that I think that we don't necessarily think enough about is how our financial health ties into all of that. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of that today, and just going back and giving you some of the history that goes along with where we find ourselves in this current time. So a little bit about me. I said I worked in the insurance industry and risk management industry in the corporate America space for about 22 years. Stepped away last year and opened my own firm. We are headquartered in New York City on 43rd and 6th Avenue. The company is called Momentum Risk Management. I am the managing partner. And I started the firm last year with 3 other partners who are dedicated in the investment and financial planning space. And when we imagined what that would look like, what a company, a Black-owned insurance brokerage could look like, and we are only the second in New York City, so that's a tremendous feat for us. When we imagined what it could look like, we wanted to make sure that it was an advisory practice. It was a place where people felt as if they had someone holding their hand. It was consultative. It was going to be knowledge-based. It was going to be based in transparency of the insurance industry. And it was going to make sure that we were dedicated to all of the wellness, the physical, emotional, the spiritual, and the financial practice of wellness for our client base. And I think we've done a tremendous job at doing that in year 1. And I'm really, really excited about where we're headed for year 2. I think we are in the middle. Hey, so I want to say, hey, I see people waving and saying hello. Hello, y'all. I missed you. I have missed you. I see people talking about you've listened to me on Karen Hunter. Thank you so much. That is where I got my start in radio. And I am always grateful and thankful to the architect, Karen Hunter, for giving me an opportunity to get started in radio. So I wanted to start by talking about that career in corporate America and in corporate risk, because what I think I realized very early on, as I began to work with people of a different demographic, of a different wealth contingent, was that they often talked about their family story and how they made their money and how they kept their money. It was very big conversation in their personal circles as well as in their business circles about how they maintained and held on to and kept their money. And I look at my own community and see so often that we don't necessarily think the same way, or we don't respond or act the same way around money, right? And I tried to put some context around why that was. And for a very long time, I really, really couldn't get to the heart of why that is, right? And so it really, really kind of felt perplexing to me that I couldn't understand why we had such a hard time in communities of color about talking about money. And so what I started to do was do some historical research, right? And some background. And that historical research and that background led me into some really, 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 really unique spaces, right? And so when I evaluate why we don't talk about money or how we attain it or how we've created it or how we've kept it, a lot of times it's because we don't know our stories, right? And what that means is we don't know a lot of the historical accuracies or the stories that come out of our own family history to kind of tell us who we were or how we garnered or how we made it through or how we struggled and how we created wealth in this country. And a lot of that comes out of the vestiges of slavery, right? I read something very recently that said that slavery is white history and how we survived it is Black history, right? And I agree with so much of that. But what I think that some of the vestiges of slavery have produced is a rampant distrust in the systems in which people use to establish and create wealth, right? And so some of that superstition that we talk about or that distrust that we talk about in the systems that exist in this country to help us create or establish wealth, right? We will think, well, why do we distrust the system? Why are we superstitious about it? Why does it not feel like something that we want to participate in? Why are we afraid to talk about, oh, well, I'm not invested in the stock market, or, oh, I don't own life insurance, or, oh, I didn't know that life insurance could be used as a tool to create wealth, or, oh, I didn't buy a home, or I don't have renter's insurance, or all of the things that we think about when we think about asset protection and wealth and things that help us accumulate wealth. We don't talk about those things often. And why don't we talk about them? So I mentioned that we don't have trust in the system, right? Well, why don't we have trust in the system? It's not that we're just superstitious. And I do believe that people of color, Black people specifically, a lot of our superstitions come from African tradition and practice, but they also come from how we were treated in this country, right? And we cannot disband or disconnect ourselves from that truth, right? So let me just flip pages here because I wrote notes. So I want to start with talking about what I think some of the risk factors are, right? And so one of the risk factors I think is that we need to talk about is the diagnosis of it, right? We need to diagnose what our risk factor is. And so a risk factor is something that increases a person's chances of developing a condition of sort over time. And like obesity is a risk factor, right? It's a risk factor for heart disease. Smoking cigarettes is a risk factor for lung cancer. Yeah, well, not talking about money or not investing or not saving or not purchasing asset protection tools that help you to create and protect money are also risk factors for poverty. They are also risk factors for not being able to create wealth, right? And so I think we should talk about where that comes from. Historically, we are right to have a distrust in the system because we've been disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged by that system. So it's not our fault, right? So I need to do that first. I need to say it is not our fault for where we find ourselves. When I think about how life insurance or insurance in this country was established, some of the first insurance companies in this country in the 1700s insured ships coming from Great Britain and Spain and other places around the world, bringing goods, but also slaves um, into this country. And insurance companies participated in those risks by insuring slaves to make sure that if their slaves were lost, that if slave masters lost their slaves, or if they lost their goods, right? They treated slaves as goods, not as people, that they could be financially compensated for those losses. Well, when we think about how those mortality tables and how those tables were created, to even come up with the numbers on what they would charge for for insurance on slaves, what that looked like, right? The mortality tables that they used to establish those numbers, to establish those figures, wasn't really based in any mathematical science like traditional actuaries who actually study, right, to come up with rate and pricing. It wasn't based on any of that. It was based on making sure that they charged twice the money or the price for ensuring the lives of Black people as they did for white people, with no statistical evidence on our health, with no statistical evidence on our markers or health markers. It was just made to charge us more because we were Black. And so when we talk about this distrust of the system, it actually started from the outset, right? And when slavery ended and Black people began to establish themselves as sharecroppers and farmers and domestics, and lawyers and doctors and teachers and educators and bankers in their own economic system, those policies and those tables continued. So Black people were paying twice the price for coverage than anybody else was paying, and any of their white counterparts at the same age or gender or health rate were paying. And so what we know that led to was poverty. We know that led to the inability, if you will, to not be able to buy as much coverage as maybe these families necessarily needed to establish a wealth contingent in this country, right? And those mortality tables continued until the 1920s or the 1930s in this country before they were disbanded and discontinued. And just in the year 2000, the California legislature actually began to document and decree that so much wealth was lost for African Americans in this country because of those mortality tables. So I have to start by saying our distrust of the financial systems in this country is entirely valid. It is entirely valid. It makes sense, right? It comes from a space of truth. We are not an overly superstitious people. We have been maligned and mistreated in this country, right? At every turn when we've attempted to establish wealth, we were charged more, and things were done to us to make sure that we didn't have the opportunity to establish wealth like other people. And so how do we right those wrongs, right? That's one of the conversations that we should have today. How do we right some of the things that have been done to us in this society? One of the ways that I think that we need to fix things is to just be present and be clear about where we've been in this country and what we've done to people. When we talk about reparations, I think I've never in my lifetime seen so much conversation around the conversation of reparations and whether or not it's due us. And I think, some of the fallout or some of, and I wouldn't call it backlash because I think it's a good thing, but some of the amazing work that is happening out of the protesters. And we should salute these young people who are out on the streets and making sure that our voices are raised and our agendas are elevated, because they are forcing conversations to happen at every level of the corporate sector, of the private sector, of the public sector, about what should be done to make our institutions and our systems more equitable and more fair for people to be able to establish themselves. So it is definitely time for us to be having the right conversations, right? And conversations around how wealth is established or how economic inequalities persist in a community and a society like ours. So I think that that's important because it has contributed to the impede and the stalling of generational wealth creation in our communities. So with that, I want to skip over to how we start to fix some of these things, right? Well, once we've diagnosed what some of our problems are, and I think we are in great space of diagnosing what some of our societal ills have been, right? then I think we can start to invest in the knowledge and in support and in building teams and making sure that we are structuring people in spaces that are going to help us get to a better financial space, right? A better financially well space. So I want to talk about due diligence and what that looks like, right? I think we should be establishing ourselves in terms of working with people in our communities who do this work, right? And it's important to talk about due diligence because I will say up front that not every investment advisor or not every insurance advisor is um, made equally. Some of us do a lot of work and investment in the space of knowledge and making sure that people understand what it is that they need and what it is that they have. But not everybody does that, right? But I think when we start to talk about what it would look like to start to build support and change momentum, to start to address these systemic economic inequalities in our communities, it's going to take more of us having these conversations on a regular basis. This is gritty work, right? It is stuff that has to be done. It can't be done in a vacuum. These are things that we have to be talking about on a necessary and frequent basis. And some of the ways in which we do that, as consumers, we start thinking about where we're spending our money. I know there are a lot of people who work in the space of economics who talk about how we spend, how we are consuming, what we're buying, who we're supporting, what goods, what domestic products we're purchasing, who we're buying them from, and then what are the agendas of the products and the goods and the services that we're aligning ourselves with. How are they spending our money once we give it to them, right? And I think we have to think about that. In the last couple of years, a lot of companies have come out into the public sector to talk about where people spend our dollars. One of the companies that I think that does that really, really well is a company, and make sure you take this down because they have a great app. And it can be, you can find it on the App Store as well as I think Google Play for all you Droid users. It's called Goods Unite Us. In this company, I've actually interviewed the president of this company on my show, Next Nation. Oh, and I didn't even talk about that. So for those of you who are not aware, Sunday at noon and 8 p.m. on Sirius XM, channel 126, please tune into Next Nation on Sirius XM. It's where we talk about leadership and lifestyle and legacy discussions on how we stay involved in our communities and how we make sure we're getting the most for our dollars and out of the people and the products and the companies that we're investing in. So please make sure you tune into Next Nation. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I'll be talking to 3 great fathers who are friends of mine, and we're going to be talking about the residue of Father's Day and how Black fathers are not celebrated enough in our community. And it was a really pivotal discussion. So if you get an opportunity, please tune into that. And we'll also have the only minority owned NASCAR owner on the show tomorrow as well. He's a friend of mine. His name is John Cohen, and he'll be on Next Nation tomorrow as well. So if you get an opportunity, please tune in for that. So what I was mentioning previously was this company called Goods Unite Us, and Goods Unite Us exists. They exist to make sure that the companies and the products and the services and the goods that we purchase, they show us how they spend their money or how they politically lean, right? And so I went on. You can go on and you can take the test, and they ask you for all of the different products and names of stuff that you buy on a daily basis and how they utilize your money. And I took the test and found out that 52% of my spending, I'll say it again, 52% of my spending was going towards causes and political organizations that I absolutely do not align with. And it kind of blew me away because I'd never actually thought real significantly or deeply about the fact that the money that I spend when I go to a Dunkin' Donuts, or when I go to a grocery store, a particular grocery store, that they may be utilizing their money on political campaigns, or giving money to candidates that I don't necessarily support, who don't have the same value or belief system that I do. And so I think it's those kinds of things, right? It is those little efforts that we make on an everyday basis to make sure that we are realigning or reimagining or establishing ourselves, that what we say we believe in, or what we say holds true for us, that we spend our money, that it is also happening, that we're also utilizing companies that believe or spend our money the way in which we do, right? Yeah, so somebody asked in the chat, and I'm paying attention to the chat, so please throw your questions or comments in the chat, and I will address them. The name of the company is called Goods Unite Us. They have a website, which is really great, but they also have an app that you can download in the App Store or in Google Play. And you can just plug and play, put all of the products and services and goods that you use. They have a wealth of companies involved on the app, and they will give you the hard facts, hard critical facts about some of the organizations, corporations, and companies that you use. So please, if you get an opportunity, invest in that. Oh, and it's free. I should just say that. Okay, so when I talk about, how we do some of these things, I talked about due diligence. I talked about making sure that we are working with companies that align or feel close to the value systems that we say we believe in. We need to talk about investing in our communities. We need to talk about what it looks like to make sure that we have products that are protecting our assets, right? One of the other things that I think that we should talk about, because it's necessary to discuss, is we should talk about credit and credit-based pricing, because it is happening across the board in how we buy and how we purchase. For instance, in the insurance industry, credit is one of the tools that are used to determine pricing for a product. So for car insurance, your credit is being leveraged. They are taking a soft score credit report when when you buy a car or when you take out a new auto insurance policy. Same thing for homeowners insurance, right? If you open a business and you're a business owner, it is the same thing. They are doing a soft score credit pricing to kind of give themselves a window or a mirror, right, into what kind of consumer you are. And your credit rating has a lot to do with what you're paying for the insurance that you're purchasing, right? Um, and why I think that's important, because people who have better credit or who have more money pay less for the services and the insurances and the financial products that they purchase, um, than people who do not, than poor people, than people who have lower credit scores. We've addressed this very recently in the firm. I am working on a presentation to present in some short order to our congressional leaders about how I believe that credit pricing is damaging communities of color, because they are just being leveraged in a way that is forcing them to pay more for the services and the products and the insurances they purchase. So we need to talk about that, but you need to be aware of it, right? And if you're not aware of it, then it means you could be adversely exposed or affected by it, right? And so what does that look like? That looks like if you go to buy a Toyota Camry, and someone who doesn't look like you is going to buy a BMW, and they get a lower credit rate, they have a higher credit rating, so they get a lower interest rate, and are paying a lower monthly car note and lower insurance than you are paying for a car that is maybe $15,000 or $20,000 less than the vehicle they are purchasing. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about how money is kept out of our hands and how we are paying more for the services and the products that we're using. The name of the app, again, everybody keeps asking, is Goods Goods Unite Us. Goods Unite Us, right? And that is the company that I mentioned. Will help you determine how your money is being leveraged um, for the products and the services that you buy. Some of the other things that I wanted to talk about really quickly is research. Being armed with knowledge and facts. We live in an information age, and one of the things that I've noticed is that so many people just do not have enough information about how they're contributing in the world, about how they're spending their money, how they're spending their time, how they're spending their dollars. And when you don't know better, we say when you know better, you do better. When you don't know, you don't get better. You get taken advantage of. And I think it's critically important for us now in this time to make sure that we know more, that we are researching more, that we are just spending a better use of our time, making sure that we are more prepared and more aware. It is critically important. When I think about where we are in this social climate and in this social space, people are talking about that this is the new civil rights movement. And I have said over and over again, no, this is not the new civil rights movement. I don't think we've ever ended the civil rights movement. This is the new economic rights movement, right? This is an opportunity for us to make sure that we are leveraging and leveling the playing field in a way that has probably never been done before in this country. It is critically, crucially important that we make sure that we are holding people accountable and responsible for what they are doing to us economically. And so what does that look like? You know, we talked about reparations earlier. I think that companies are coming to the table to discuss what they can do to improve communities. I think we should come to the table as individuals to make sure that we can do what we can do to improve ourselves. And some of that looks like making sure that you are working with people in your community for the services and the goods that you need, right? You're working with people who look like you and have similar interests, and who understand your needs and are making sure that they are working to secure them or protect them. What else does that look like? It looks like we can no longer blindly support products or institutions or people, you know, without making them be accountable to how they are showing up and treating us and what we're getting out of them. That's what all of that. That's what all of that looks like. I also want to talk a little bit about treatment plans, reimagining ourselves. I started off by talking about, oh, so hold on, there's some commentary in the chat. Oh, thank you so much. So the name of my company, again, I'll give the name. The name of my company, again, is Momentum Risk Management. You can find us on the web at www.momentum-risk.com. And I think Chris is producing this segment. So Chris, if you would, please make sure that you put it in the chat for me. It is www.momentum dash, and I'll put it in while I'm talking, momentum-risk.com. And we work on all areas of insurance. We work on business insurance, we work on personal insurance, we work on life and disability. We work with corporations and nonprofit organizations. We work with individuals. We work with families. We work with people. And the work that we do, I think, is more important now than ever. So I want to tell you a little bit of a personal story, because I think it's important. I don't want to talk ad nauseum about stuff. I want to talk, you know, specifically and individually about me, and hopefully about you. And hopefully we get some people to weigh in and talk in the chat and ask questions. I mentioned treatment plans and what that looks like for now, for where we are. Last year, when I left corporate America, I didn't leave. How do I phrase this? I did not leave without thinking very deeply and critically and spiritually about the move. I was very afraid to make the jump out of corporate America. It had been all that I had done for 20 plus years. And but I had grown very tired of my work in corporate America. I had grown very tired of being the only Black woman in big companies and organizations. I had grown very tired of being in spaces where I felt like I had to fight for the people who weren't in the room. I had grown very tired of forcing conversations, forcing people to have conversations about the political or the economic climate that Black and brown people were in. Last year, this time, or 2 years ago, this time, when I was having these conversations, people didn't want to have these conversations. And I was forcing them in corporate boardrooms. I was forcing white men um, who didn't have the same background or demographic or social strata or social structure or family structure that I did. I was having conversations with them on a regular basis about the importance of doing business with this new wealth contingent, doing business with Black and brown people, doing business with Black business owners, doing business with Black women who are the leading group of entrepreneurs in this country. And they couldn't be too bothered. They could not be so bothered. And I think in many ways I was ostracized and made to feel as if I wasn't really welcomed in those rooms. And after a while, got to a point where I really started to have to reevaluate myself, reevaluate my title, reevaluate my corner office, reevaluate my lookout to Empire State Building, and ask myself, was it enough? Was it important enough for me to be the only one in the room who looked like me? Was it important enough for me to be the one that was breaking the ceiling in those organizations? Or did I need to be the person who was willing to do it on my own and go for it on my own and make sure that I could work with my people and not have to make excuses for or beg people to see the value in the business that I was bringing in? And I made that decision in February of 2019. And then I stayed while I began to structure and put the beginning foundations of momentum risk management together. And I have to tell you that that time period was rough. That's not the word that I wanted to use, but I'll just say it was rough. I had to learn how to reimagine what my contributions in the world were going to look like. And I started talking to myself and I started praying for myself. And I had to start seeing myself in my highest and best, as my highest and best self. And that took a lot of work. It took a lot of work because I had been trained to believe in what I do versus who I actually am, right? And so when I think about where we are in this social climate, I see a lot of conversation. I see a lot of weigh-in about where we are. And I think what you're seeing, this groundswell that we're seeing, I think people have decided that who they are and what they believe in is much more important than what they do. Or who they align themselves with, right? And there's this need to just kind of like reevaluate and reimagine all areas of ourselves. And that's what I began to do. And that decision led me to leave corporate America, right? And it was a hard decision to make. That decision also led me to leave the Karen Hunter Show. And it was because I knew that the work that I was going to be moving into, building and running my own company and running my own organization, and it was going to take parts of me that I really didn't even know that existed yet. And I was going to need to find that person to make sure that that person existed and could do this work. And so there's, as we start to think about ways in which we can change ourselves emotionally, financially, spiritually, it's going to require that every individual person, not just companies and corporations and institutions, right? They're going to have to change. But yes, we are also as individuals going to have to come to the table and reimagine ourselves much differently than we ever have before. And in many instances, in ways that people don't necessarily know us, right? And so that forced me to have to confront things about myself that I don't know that I necessarily had ever dealt with. And it put me in some very uncomfortable positions. Probably the most discomfort I've experienced in my life has been within the last 18, 19 months. And my life professionally and personally have changed so much. But I'm so grateful about the opportunity to make sure that I am a Black business owner who's working with all kinds of people, but specifically Black people, on making sure that we are helping them to create uh, and keep generational wealth. And so, like I said, I think that some of the treatment plan that is going to be required in this time is going to make sure that we are ready to deal with ourselves in a way that we've never dealt with ourselves before. It's going to mean that we're going to need to get our taxes right. We're going to need to get our money right, right? We're going to need to step out on faith. Some of us are going to have to walk away from jobs that we've known for 30 years to live our best and reimagine selves, and that's okay too, right? And that work is hard, but it's critical and it's necessary. And that shift is required now more than ever, especially in the middle of a pandemic when everybody is reimagining how we do everything that we do. There is no more perfect time for us to be having these conversations with ourselves about how we show up in our lives. Uh, because that's necessary, that relationship with yourself in terms of wealth creation and wealth establishment, that's the first relationship that you have to get in order. You cannot trust, and you can't trust a wealth advisor if you don't trust yourself. I'm going to say that again. You cannot trust anybody. You cannot have positive or affirming or relationships built on a foundation of trust if you do not first trust yourself. When I started my business, I didn't start my business with a ton of monies from banks. I took loans from myself. And within the last 4 months, I paid all of the money that I took from myself, I paid it back. And when I took the money out of my savings and out of my 401k, I said to myself, Sylvia, okay, if you do this, whether or not you succeed or fail, you have to put this money back. You are building a future. You are building for retirement. You are building for your family's future. You are building for your children's future. You are building for the children that you probably will, for the grandchildren or the great grandchildren that you may or may not ever see. I had to have that conversation with myself, and I paid myself back. And it's a good feeling to be able to do that. Why? Because if you don't start with the relationship that you have with you, you are teaching yourself that you can't be trusted, not anybody else, that you can't be trusted. If you tell yourself, I'm going to start on a diet, I'm going to start this Monday, and then Tuesday comes and Wednesday comes and you never start on that diet, or you never get out and do that work or do that walk or what you've told yourself that you were going to do, you are teaching yourself, you are saying to yourself on the inside, I can't trust me. And when you cannot trust you, you cannot trust anybody else. You have to begin to evaluate yourself and build the necessary relationship that you need with yourself in order to have firm and foundational relationships with other people, right? So I'll say that again. Wealth building and wealth creation is all about trust, and it's all about work. And we have to be ready in this time to make sure that we are doing that work for ourselves, that we are gaining knowledge for ourselves, that we are evaluating the people we work with and the businesses that we support for ourselves. Can't go off of what we've heard. How many people such and such told me that one can't be trusted? How do you know that? How do you know they really have a relationship with that person? You have to know what you need to do for you, for you. You cannot rely on other people's probably uninformed or poorly researched information to make decisions for yourself. I'm seeing questions come in. Hold on. I really don't want to, I don't want to skip over this. I want to make sure that I answer some of this because I see a lot of talks happening here. I could talk all day to myself and I don't want to do that. I definitely don't want to do that. So Brenda says, I'm working with a credit advisor right now. They helped me get 14 items removed from my credit report. Excellent. And then I consolidated my school loans, which was a big jump. Excellent, sis. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And sometimes that's really all it takes is picking up a phone, you know, calling your creditors or calling the people that you work with and asking, especially if you have an established credit history and established history of good payment, to talk about, are there, what else are available? What else is available? What other programs are available to me? If you don't get anything out of this COVID time and sitting still and in this pandemic, make sure you are picking up the phone and calling your creditors and asking for what they have available. Because not only did Congress give monies to individuals, they gave money to lots of money to corporations to be able to make strategic ways to do business, get artful about how they do business with individuals. So make sure you're picking up the phone and calling your creditors and having these conversations about different ways they can do business with you, or lowering down interest rates and that, or allowing you to make double payments or paying towards principals and that type of thing. All of that is super important. Make sure you are picking up your phone. Make sure you are opening your mail and reading your mail, okay? And taking advantage of opportunities that come available to you. Somebody else says, this is the perfect time to consider, how can we come through this pandemic experience in an even better place? I agree. You know, there are so many of us in Black and Brown communities who've lost family members and loved ones who were either ill or were exposed and were not able to recover. My mom lost her best friend. My godmother passed away from COVID, literally the second or the third week that we went into lockdown. And you know, that was a tremendous loss in my family. You know, and I can't say that we've bounced back from it yet. We're still working our way through it. My mother's had a really, really hard time bouncing back from it. But one of the ways in which we have gotten better, you know, over the last few months is spending. When you are moving back and forth and moving and shaking, I commute to New York I was commuting for Sirius as well as commuting for my firm. I'm spending a lot of money, eating out, not paying attention, right? And I'm even guilty of it. I work in the industry. I've worked in this space for 22 years. I'm guilty of the same. I've saved a tremendous amount of money in the last few months. And it forced me to take stock of some of the things that I was spending that I really didn't necessarily need. I haven't had nails on, y'all. Look at my nails. They look basic as hell, but guess what? I'll survive, right? I haven't had nails on in 4 months, and I'm okay. Right? And when I just think about the amount of money that I was spending on that and many other things, many other things. So yes, this time period and this experience with this pandemic has kind of like forced, I don't know if it's forced you, but it definitely has forced me to reevaluate where I am and what I can do to be better. Hold on, some other questions. Oh, Andrea says, wow, I needed to hear that. Yes, I'm glad that was helpful for you. What do you think about using a trust for passing on next generation wealth? So what I will say about a trust is great. It's a great tool to help you protect yourself from taxes and your assets being exposed, but you also have to have something to put into those trusts, right? So we could establish 10 trusts. If we don't have anything to put into them, meaning money or assets, then the trust really means nothing, right? Because the government is not going to come and seize your estate at death if you don't have money, or unless if you have taxes that are owed, sure, you know, they may come after your estate for that. But if you don't have money, if you don't have assets, a trust will probably not make much of a difference. But our trust is a great tool and great vehicle to use to establish or to protect your wealth or your assets if you have them, right? But I think one of the things that we need to talk about in our community is making sure that we have those establishments. And how does that information and how does that happen? Well, I saw very recently somebody was talking about making sure that we are not selling our grandparents' houses. Our grandparents owned more property than we do. And that's by design. It's incredibly expensive to live around the country nowadays, but some of us are not holding on to our family's estates or our family's properties because people don't want to do the work that goes along with keeping those estates in place. Guess what? Our grandparents and our great grandparents fought to make sure that we had property, and I think it is necessary to make sure that we are holding on to a lot of that in our communities, because our communities, when they leave us, they do not come back to us. They do not come back to us. We talk about gentrification. Gentrification essentially means that people are coming back and they're coming to your neighborhood to purchase the neighborhood for themselves. No, they're not going to purchase it and keep it the same way it was for you. They're going to purchase it for themselves. So we need to be involved in those conversations. We need to be involved in cities around this great nation and making sure that we are investing in those communities, buying back our hoods and investing in our hoods. A lot of us get money and leave the community and we never come back. We should be putting money into our communities and investing in them and make sure that they're rebirthed, that we are part of those rebirths or those rejuvenations. Any other questions? I see somebody else has popped in. Hi, Professor Craig.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing
I
well.
wrote my question and I wanted to ask if most of us are small business owners, me being a small business owner with hair tonic out of my kitchen sink. Can you talk a little bit about the pros and cons of an LLC versus a sole proprietorship? Sole proprietorship, all the liabilities are my personal situation, but because it's so small, it seems a little easier for me to be a sole proprietorship until I've got my trademark and other things, and then I become an LLC. Can you talk? I can take advice.
Yeah,
I want some insight.
So the sole proprietorship, is it owned in your personal name at the business? Is it owned in your personal name? Like, is it Professor, right, whatever the product is it Professor Craig? Yes. It is? You're saying yes, it is?
I'm sorry, it's hair tonic, but it's under my social. It's hair tonic, but it's under my social security number.
So the reason why I think an LLC is important is because, and it's not that expensive to establish. A lot of times we think it's more that you need more assets or you need more to establish an LLC than we actually do. But a sole proprietorship is great to get off on your feet, to get your business established. But when you own things in your personal name, then that means you are exposing yourself in a way which, for business use, your personal assets are also being leveraged and exposed. How do I mean that? So let's say you're out one night, had a little bit too much to drink, you're driving home, you get into an accident and somebody is injured. When you have a business in your personal name, or when you have assets in your personal name, now, if you get sued personally, they can come after not only your personal assets, meaning your home, your autos, and any coverage that you may have had under that individual or personal auto liability policy. They can also come after your professional assets, right? And when you own it personally, it can be leveraged much easier than when you own an LLC, because only what is inside that LLC is what's covered or is what's used. I don't think businesses should be owned in your personal name at all. Even if it's, let's say, Larry Johnson Tax Accounting, make sure it's an LLC or an Inc. or a corporation. I definitely don't think you should be owning stuff in your personal name, because it just gives you too much risk exposure personally.
Can you help me transition to that from a sole proprietorship to an LLC? I am finding I'm finding a lot of bright lights and whistles, and I'm not finding clear information.
Yes, I can give you some information that'll help you transition. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. I'll be in touch with you via email.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I can definitely help you do that. And I don't know that I necessarily was clear about that. I need to kind of like explain that again. So a sole proprietorship is when you own a business, but it's either owned in your personal name or it's owned by one person, meaning you. And you don't have any asset or liability protection in place that protects you separately from that business exposure, right? So an LLC makes sure that with an LLC, you just be an officer of that company, of the LLC, right? So you have the product named or deemed under the LLC, and then now the asset itself, all of that is pushed, that liability is pushed into the LLC and not your personal asset. So there's questions in
Okay.
what if it is a sole proprietorship in a business name? We see that often. And also there are more taxes involved in an LLC versus a sole proprietorship. Depends. It depends on the income. It definitely depends on the income. And it also depends on what state you're in, right? So Professor, what state are you in?
I'm in New York, and New York is very liberal, Sylvia. New York, I get lots of tax breaks and wonderful opportunities because I'm a business owner. But I am concerned that as it grows, the liability of actually taking something that is topically applied and just putting myself in an uncomfortable position. But I really, really prefer the growth of Hair Tonic being a separate entity. I'm really erring towards the LLC piece, but I establish it as a sole proprietorship because in New York, you've got to really, really make good money, it seems, to sustain an LLC.
Agreed, but there are a lot of tax benefits too if you're not making money in the first few years. So I would say to you, you also want to make sure that you are establishing credit for the business and not in your personal name, right? Because then everything gets leveraged. When the business and everything is factored under your personal credit,
That's right.
Everything is being weighed in together. There will never be separation, and you could establish yourself under your tax ID number or your EIN number. You could establish business credit for the product separately from your personal credit, because there are times when you own a sole proprietorship, there are times if you experience let's say personal loss, and it affects your credit score. It also, then that means that it's affecting your business from being able to get credit as well, or get opportunities when your personal social security score is being leveraged.
Sylvia.
It happened to me. I mean, it wasn't devastating, but it just happened. That's why I want to talk to you. I'll be in touch with you.
Okay, no problem.
Craig, if you could turn on your Wi-Fi, you are very spotty. If you have Wi-Fi available, turn on your Wi-Fi so that when we talk in the next hour, you will be able to be heard better. Sylvia, I have a question for you from my sous chef, Patricia. She wanted to know, where did you get the fortitude? Where did you get the wherewithal? What did you rely upon when you left the corporate world, or who?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I think this crop of entrepreneurs and business owners on the SiriusXM Urban View brand are some of the best in the world. And so, and I say that I'm being incredibly honest. I don't just, come on behind certain people every week. These people that are on this channel are real friends. And so, my business idea, I didn't come up with my business idea. My business idea came because I was at an event. Alan Boomer and Tiffany Hawkins, who you may know, they have a show on SiriusXM. I brought them to the channel because I thought that their voice was necessary on SiriusXM. And, I just thought that Karen should have them as a voice on the channel, and she was willing to do it. And then we all got shows on the weekends, and we were really friends. Alan and I went to college together, and he was also a client. So they own gyms and cleaners, and they were insuring their gyms and cleaners with me. And he and I were at a business conference that I invited him to as a client, and we were the only two Black people in the room at the Yale Club. And he said to me, he said, "What would it look like? What would it take to get you out of this scene and into, you know, ownership for yourself, owning your own insurance brokerage?" And I was like, "Yeah, right, whatever." And so my husband had said it to me. My husband had told me that I should own my own insurance brokerage years ago, and not saying that I didn't believe him. I just didn't think it was the right time. I didn't think we had, you know, enough established money. I didn't think I had enough wherewithal to do it. So I just kind of like, yeah, I listened to it and then I didn't listen to it. And then Alan kept at it. And I now know that the idea originally came from Tiffany, because Tiffany told me that it was originally, she said to him, like, Sylvia would be great owning her own insurance brokerage. But the more they talked about it and I started doing the research, you know, there were no Black owned insurance brokerages within a 30-mile radius, and really more than that. And so then I started to get intrigued from that direction. Like, oh, well, what could I do if I really was out on my own and able to help my people the way in which I know I could help my people and that I really wanted to help them. And then I just started having conversations behind the scenes with people that were in the industry that I had worked with. You know, it made it really, I can't say that it was easy, but it made it easier that I had great relationships in high spaces in a lot of these different companies that I wanted to do business with. Because when I went to them with the idea that I was considering, you know, starting my own firm, everybody was supportive. Every single person was supportive. And people granted me relationships and granted me, you know, the ability to sell their products without having to do a lot. People knew me. They knew who I was. They knew that I had worked in these organizations for 20 years, and they believed in me. And, you know, I'll be honest, I did not do it. I say it over and over again. I didn't do it with a lot of credit. I didn't do it with a ton of loans. I did it with customers. I did it with a lot of people who believed in me. And I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything for the world.
All right. Got me. That is awesome. I want to thank you for joining us, Sylvia K. Alston. And you are just completely awesome. Thank you for being honest and sharing the historical perspective. And that is equally as important as just picking up and trying to have a conversation about where we are right now, because there are some historical implications about how we got here. And it is important to know that so that we can move forward, but more importantly, so we never go back.
I agree with you. I think it's most important, and I think that so many of us don't know it. You know, is I wouldn't say that it's scary, because I there's so much that I've learned in the last, you know, few years. I mean, me learning about slave insurance kind of stopped me in my tracks, LaJoyce. I mean, it stopped me in my tracks when I really sat and thought with how evil and vile that could be, but how that framework shaped the wealth in this country. You know, that you could actually put insurance on human beings for, if they die, you know, you will be compensated for that economic loss. I mean, that is vile.
That's deep.
That is deep. But there are so many industry verticals in this country that have benefited from it, and we've never addressed it. So we have to address it. When people say, I only need $10,000, why I need all of this insurance? That thinking, if you think about your grandmothers and your great aunties and your great uncles who think that way, they were trained to believe that. They were trained to believe that, which was out of the ills of these slave insurance policies, believing that they would never be able to purchase anything to create wealth that they weren't paying 2 and 3 times the price for. So, you know, that's where all of that thinking comes from. And in order to kill that thinking, we have to deal with where that thinking actually originated.
Absolutely. Well, again, like I said, I appreciate you. And you always bring us something that's unexpected. The one thing that I was most appreciative of from your talk from last year at the Wellness Warriors Getaway was you said that other communities utilize insurance as a mechanism for wealth building. So as soon as the baby is born, they're taking out $1 million policies, and now that child, whenever they come of age, 18, whatever, they can use that money for college, buying property, whatever. Can you speak to that and explain that in detail? Because I think that's worth hearing and worth repeating again.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I learned very early on in business is that the way we look at insurance, other people in other communities, they just don't look at it that way. When I meet with clients outside of my community, they understand the importance of life insurance and what it's going to do to help their families establish wealth, right? And so, to your point, they are buying millions, sometimes $1 million, sometimes $2 million whole life insurance policies on their children. And what that allows them to be able to do is when their children get up of age, they use that money to buy homes with. They use that money to start businesses with. They use that money to pay off college with, right? They're not using actual money that they've made in business to fund those dreams. Those insurance policies are help funding them. It's the same thing in business insurance. When I think about this pandemic and how many people didn't have business insurance for their businesses during this pandemic. Other communities just understand and they get it, and they realize why it's important. And I think because we've never had that framework, and also because, and I said this too today, we don't have enough of advisors who look like us doing this work,
Yeah.
who have the knowledge and who have the tool set to be able to speak to our community in this way. We don't have enough of them in the table. You don't see the College of Risk and Insurance in historically Black colleges and universities. You just don't see it. It's not a field that people look to go in, right? And I think that that's another way that they make sure that they keep us out of the conversation when they talk about the establishment of wealth creation and legacy. When you think about how money was created in this country and how wealth became prominent in this country, it was in three ways. The stock exchange was a later tool. The first way they did it was real estate, owning property, and also by having insurance. Those were the two industries that they used the most, and slavery, right? Those were the two industries that they used the most to create their wealth. So we have to be involved in those conversations. And I get it. We have been maligned and mistreated, and we have been abused. And listen, there's been landmark legal cases in the last 20 years. In 2000, MetLife, New York Life, settled out of court well over $50-60 million to the families, paying restitution back to the families of sharecroppers and farmers who bought these life insurance policies where they paid more for the policy than the policy was actually even worth, right? So we've still got a lot to do. We've still got a lot of exposing to do. But from an individual standpoint, and when we talk about making sure that we are at the table and what it looks like to start to reestablish what legacy creation, you cannot be a part of that conversation and not talk about the importance of insurance in that conversation.
So let's hear the game plan right now. The baby's born. What kind of policy do we take out on the baby when the baby's born?
It's a whole life insurance policy.
And how much?
So the laws around that, LaJoyce, within the last year, even since I had that conversation, have changed, right? In the state, yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they got hip. So in the state of New York, there's a new law that's in place that speaks to what we call suitability, right? Whether or not you want to purchase $1 million life insurance, but are you suitable for that product? And what they're saying is you may not be suitable for the product if you make $60,000 or $70,000 a year. You may not be suitable to purchase a $1 million life insurance policy for your family. Or in New York, the law is even even more descriptive. If you don't have a $1 million policy for yourself on your own life, you can't then go out and purchase a $1 million policy for your children. So they put these new parameters in place to make sure that if you are going to try to establish the creation of wealth, that, there's some structure in place, right? And it's keeping certain people out of the conversation. But what I will say is this: insurance, in order to establish money in insurance policies, especially from a whole life perspective, we have to do it early. This is a game that has to be done as early as possible. So when kids are getting out of college and they're starting to get their first jobs, these are the time frames when we should be talking about setting our children up to be buying life insurance policies, to make sure that these are additional tools that they use as, just another way to fund their retirement. I think how we think about insurance, it has to be reimagined. And I talked about that a little bit. We have to imagine the conversation entirely. No, it's not just about for our death. It's about for our life, the money that we're saving to live out the rest of our lives. But that's conversation that has to happen. It can't happen in a vacuum. It has to happen over and over and over again. And we have to invest in the importance of those conversations. And I think we still have work to do there.
Tell us about the importance of the catch-up. Now that we have this information, and now we finally have an opportunity to do the catch-up that you told me about, the Roth IRA that's with the $2,500 investment and what that could mean for a child 18.
Yeah. What do you mean about, you said talk about the catch-up?
Yeah, how that can be the catch-up and how you leave it there to let it grow.
Listen, they got a 400-year start. I mean, they got a 400-year start. It's going to take some time, right? But there are tools in place that we can use to start to really play catch up, right? When we're talking to Professor Craig about the importance of an LLC versus a sole proprietorship, I think children should have LLCs before they even own a business. If a child has an LLC in their own tax ID number, now as they get Christmas gifts, birthday gifts, instead of having my friends always buy my children clothes. In 2 months, Ava is out of those damn clothes, right? If we thought about maybe buying bonds, or if we thought about putting money towards her Roth IRA that is owned in her LLC name, right? Now she could use that money when she's 18 or 21 and start buying property. I always think about where Noah is going to land up going to college. Wherever he lands up going to college, rather me have him living on campus paying an uber amount of money for meal plans and him living on campus, I'd rather buy an apartment in the city that he decides to move to and go to school in, because that's giving him a way to establish himself, to establish some legacy, to establish, a foundation, some money, that when he's done with his 4 years of school, he could rent it out or he could sell it, right? So it's just, I think changing the way we think about things is necessary, and it's critical in this time. Those are some of the things, just small, that we need to do to start to leverage the playing field.
That's right. Can you give us a couple of more tips, like down and dirty, really quick, and we can be in touch with you, or we can continue to listen to Next Nation, because you do drop these jewels on Next Nation as well.
So a couple of tips. I'd say, I think a homeowner's policy is probably one of the most important tools or products that will protect your assets, right? Why do I say that? Even if you don't own a home, if you live in an apartment, anywhere you live, you need to make sure that you are not exposing yourself to risk, right? You live in an apartment and you don't have renter's insurance and the apartment burns down. How many times have we seen these GoFundMe accounts to help people, restore themselves? Or we've got to buy food or build money for people at the church who didn't have this or didn't have that. A renter's insurance policy is like $200 a year, and it protects your assets. It also covers you from a liability standpoint. If you think about, personal injury, that's covered under a home insurance policy. How many times are kids on social media talking reckless about somebody else, and somebody decides to leverage a lawsuit against you for something like that? How are you protecting yourself? If you're not protecting yourself, you're exposing yourself. So it's just, there are so many, everyday tools that are in place to make sure that we're protecting our assets, and we don't utilize them. And I think it's necessary in every area, just to make sure that we are reevaluating that.
Okay. Tanika asks, how can they use the money if the person doesn't pass away? The insurance company, none. I think that Tanika, go ahead, explain, cousin Sylvia.
I'm a little bit confused by that question. So is she?
I think she's talking about a life insurance and the person, and then, for instance, if your child is the beneficiary of your life insurance policy, Tanika, this is what I'm gleaning that you mean. That how can the child use the money if they don't pass away? Or Tanika, the other scenario is if the child has a policy on them, how can the child use the money if they don't pass away?
So I think it's all about the tool that you purchased, right? So I think what Tanika is actually referring to, I think, so there's different types of life insurance products, right? Term life insurance is something that you buy for a specific or a set span of time to cover you in the event that you die. It doesn't grow money. It is just in place to make sure that if you die, your family has some level of recourse or some protection, right? That's not what we're talking about. Whole life insurance is a life insurance contract that, as you pay for your premiums on a monthly or annual basis, there is also a cash value. There's also a cash value growing inside of the policy that you can use for a number of things. You can use it, to renovate a house. You can use it to pay for education. You can use it to start a business. And in many instances, that money is tax-free. Because you're using after-tax dollars to purchase it. So in many instances, that money is tax-free. So how you utilize it means number one, it has to be yours. You have to be the owner of. We can't just utilize money inside of insurance policies that we don't own. We have to own insurance policies. And that is how we actually get the ability to be able to use the money. The child can be the beneficiary, the mother can be the owner, and she can use the money out inside the policy to help her child do things, do business things, pay down debts, pay for school, start businesses, pay for a wedding, which I hope y'all ain't out here spending $50,000, $60,000. If COVID ain't teach us nothing else, y'all better not. I better not see anybody planning a $50,000, $60,000 wedding. I know that.
That's right. Say it.
Marry that boy in the park and go on about your life. Go forth and prosper.
In the church basement. I'm joking, but that is a
no. Don't joke. Be serious. Be serious. Black people spend way too much money on weddings. We do.
Yeah. So Shauna asks, my attorney said that if death benefits go into a trust, it's then subject to creditors who come after the estate. Is it better to do that or have the proceeds go directly to the beneficiary?
I would say that creditors will come after individuals too. It really all depends on the situation of the person who passed away. If you don't put your stuff into a trust, if there's a lot of money, it depends on how much money we're talking about. If we're talking about
how much money should you ideally even consider a trust for?
I don't know that I would say how much money. I would say how much assets. I think, like me personally, LaJoyce, I have a trust and I own 2 homes, but the house that I live in and the house that my grandmother left to my mother, who left that house to me, that's another piece of property that I have. So those 2 properties go inside my trust, right? But I have a trust on my home, but because I'm in radio, I don't want my personal assets to be leveraged in a way, if God forbid I do something that I shouldn't do, right? I don't want my personal assets to be leveraged. So that's why they're in a trust. So I'm not the type of person who say you need 4 houses to put something in a trust. I would never say that. I think it all depends on the lifestyle that you live and the assets that you maintain and how you want that to transfer to your heirs. That's what, for me, determines whether or not you should utilize a trust.
Okay. Somebody just put a really interesting question here. Sylvia, who is this? Andrea. Do companies still use dead peasant insurance? It is similar to the insurance that was used for slave ships.
I have never heard of that before in my life.
Me neither. That's a good one, though. Never heard of that one.
I have never heard of that before in my life, but I'll research it. I've never heard that before.
Dead.
Is that a phrase or is that I don't know if she's using like colloquialism or is that the actual terminology? Because I've never heard of that. So
Okay.
she stumped me on that one.
Cherie said, I want to be able to talk with you, with my daughters. How do we get in touch with you?
So I put my website in. Now, here's the other thing. I want to make sure that I say this. I am not an estate planning attorney. I am an insurance broker. So if you want to talk to me about estate planning mechanisms, I have 2 wonderful estate planning attorneys who work in New York and New Jersey. But outside of that, you have to do your own. You have to do your own due diligence. Now, I can talk about making sure that your assets are protected from creditors, from exes and everything else, but I do not do estate plans. That is not what I do. So I want to make sure, because a couple of those questions are leaning towards the estate planning end of the business, and I leave that to those specialists. I do something a lot different, but I work in conjunction with estate planning attorneys to make sure that you are equally protected. And that's the other thing that I think that we don't say enough, that you need to build a team. You have to have an advisory team. You need a lawyer. Your lawyer needs to know who your accountant is. Your accountant needs to know who your insurance broker is. And they also need to know who your estate planning attorney is. And they need to work in tandem to make sure that you are protected, because that's what other communities do. They have their people working in tandem on their behalf. Okay.
Sylvia, you are a gift to this world, honey. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for imparting this wisdom. And we look forward to listening to you more on Next Nation on Sirius XM Urban View, Channel 126 on Sunday afternoons at 12 noon, at high noon. So we appreciate you, and we'll continue to tune in. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. I love you, sis. Continue to do what you are helping us. I'm telling you, you are. You know you're helping me. And I got something for you to do, because I need that brew. So I'll meet you halfway. I'll meet you on the highway to come and get it.
All right.
All right, bye. Love you.
Love you, baby. All right. Thank you. Okay. Well, we just heard all about the risky business from Miss Sylvia.